James Clear, welcome to the Next Big Idea podcast.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and pleasure to talk as always.
James, I must be the last person that I know to read your book, which might make me like number 15 million and one. uh, I've been meaning to, I've been intending to, and wow, so glad to have had the opportunity to catch up with the rest of the world and read your book, Atomic Habits, in the last couple of weeks. Um, it does seem like an oversight that I haven't read it yet. Who are all these people who haven't read your book? Have you gotten to the point where it's surprising that someone has not read your book?
It's still surprising to me that anybody has read it. It's like a minor miracle anyone's paying attention. So I'm perfectly happy to have you read now, and anybody else is welcome to join whenever it makes sense for them. I don't know. I've been really lucky and fortunate with how it's gone, and honestly, like from the very start, I just wanted to write something that was useful and that contributed to my little corner of the universe. And thankfully, the ideas and concepts have resonated, and people have been able to take them and run with it, and make their own habits and make their own changes and create their own things. And I think that's great. And being useful has really been the driving motive the whole time.
Well, it's been useful on a very large scale. And, to put this in context, this is a kind of like once in a decade or quarter century phenomenon as far as book sales are concerned. I think it's still like I noticed it was the best-selling book on Amazon in 2021. And then I think it's currently the best-selling book on Amazon in 2023. And it was published in 2018, right? Which is just totally crazy. So how do you explain the phenomenon? I mean, I know it sort of exceeded your expectations. There were a bunch of other books about habits before yours. Why do you think Atomic Habits has kind of defied the normal physics of book sales?
Um, who knows? I have some suspicions, which I'll share in a minute. Maybe the answer is you got lucky, and these things are hard to predict, and it's the confluence of 100 different factors. Like, who knows? Maybe that is the right answer. Certainly there's got to be some element of luck involved, but I do think that there are a few big things that also made a meaningful difference to the outcome. So the first thing is, you just mentioned there are a lot of books that have been written about habits. Well, actually, that's a very important threshold that a lot of books that do get published don't cross, which is the topic timeless and universal? And I do think habits is a topic that is timeless and universal. There have been many people who've written about it before me, and there will be plenty of habit books after me. And I'm just trying to add my little bit of contribution to the pile. But the helpful thing is that I don't have to convince anybody that habits are important, or that you want to have good habits, or that you want to break bad ones. All I have to convince you of is that if you're only going to read one book about it, Atomic Habits is the one to read. And so it taps into a desire that people already have. So I think that's important. There's also an interesting dynamic with habits as a topic, which is that it's universal in the sense that we all have them, but your habits feel very individual. They feel like yours, not mine. And so everybody kind of has their own little version of it, of what it means to build their habits and which habits they're trying to create and focus on. And so it's really easy for it to feel like it has a lot of personal application to your life because of how tailored they are to your experience. So it's simultaneously universal and individualized, which is, I think, again, something that's somewhat rare in terms of book topics. There were a lot of strategic decisions that I made about the book that I do think meaningfully impacted the outcome. So trying to make it highly practical. There were a lot of books that have been written about habits before that are a little more journalistic, or they're kind of reporting on the phenomenon of habits or the science of habits. And that's all useful too. But what I ultimately care about is, how do we apply it in our daily life? How do I make this actionable and practical? And, we all want to get results in our life. And so I think if the book does genuinely help you do that, then you're in a position for a lot of people to be interested and to want to share it. And then the final thing that I'll say is that my packaging of the material is around small changes that make a big difference, or scaling habits down and making them easy, but they can still lead to a remarkable result. And there is something nice about the idea of getting 1% better each day, or trying to focus on a small behavior change, which is that it feels accessible. It feels palatable. You're like, oh, this is maybe something I could actually stick to. I'm not asking you to change your whole life. I'm just asking you to make a small adjustment and then to trust that over time that can compound and transform into something greater. And so I think the combination of those various factors, universal and timeless, individualized, but also, relatively accessible and easy to do, along with probably 1,000 other details about the book and the examples that are used and the stories that are used and how it's laid out. But collectively, those things come together to lead to one eventual result, which is word of mouth. And there's no way that any book can sell millions of copies without strong word of mouth. And so I think those factors all feed in to the fact that people want to share it or tell somebody about it or use it in their life and then tell people about the changes they made. And all of that just kind of continues to build upon itself, and the word of mouth grows and grows.
Yeah, excuse me one sec. Yes, I can confirm this because I sent a 3-paragraph section of your book to about 6 friends this morning
Hmm.
with and I've already gotten responses and encouraged them to buy the book. So that's how it happens. And I had read multiple books about habits before Atomic Habits, and it strikes me that, like you say, I think part of the power of it is that so much of what I'd read before was about the sort of scientific phenomenon of habits and how they work, and piecemeal tips like putting your running shoes out the night before to encourage you to run in the morning. But you present it as a kind of a whole system for building not just one desirable habit, but a whole series that collectively can transform your life. One second, I can hear Caleb in the back. Then you also get into like the ways in which habits interact with your identity and the kind of person you want to be, which we'll talk about more later. But it's holistically really a description of how you can fundamentally modify your life through habits in this incredible practical way, as you say. I'm embarrassed to say, James, that I was also late to. I'm embarrassed to say that I was late to catch the double entendre in the name Atomic Habits, right? Which is atomic means small. It also means explosive, not just dynamite explosive, but like A-bomb explosive.
I think there's
So
actually,
yeah.
I always say like, I chose it because I can see like 3 meanings in it. So the
Oh,
first
okay.
meaning is the word tiny
Yeah.
or small, like an atom, and your habits should be small
Yep.
and easy to do. The second one, and the one that people often overlook, is that atoms build into molecules and molecules build into compounds. And so it's like the fundamental unit of a larger
Yes.
system. And the way
Yep.
that you mentioned earlier, I kind of recommend not just making a single small change, but like many of them, and collectively you create this system of
Yes.
progress. And then the final meaning is what you just mentioned, which is like this source of immense energy or power. And I think if you understand those 3 meanings, you can kind of see the arc of the book, which is you start with changes that are small and easy to do, and you layer them together like atoms in a molecule or units in a
Yep.
larger system. And if you do that well, then you can get this really powerful, remarkable result in the long run.
Yeah, and in that second meaning, there's also sort of the implication that everything we do is made up of habits. Really, I
Mm.
mean, even the way we interact with other people in our lives. A lot of things that we think of as outside the realm of habits. I mean, I think I had previously thought of habits as more about health and fitness and work productivity, but
Sure.
but there's this argument in that second meaning of atomic that everything's built out of these behaviors. Really, it's
Well,
sort of a
certainly
behavioralist
not
claim.
everything
Yeah,
in life is a habit, but everything
yeah,
in life is touched by your habits or
right.
is influenced by them. And they have a very dramatic effect on the lifestyle that you end up living.
Yeah. Now the suggestion that it's a atomic bomb of potential of potential impact is a big one, of course, and this is based upon this notion that, as you say, habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. One of like a dozen really memorable uh, quotes from the book. Now, compound interest, as we know, is subtle at first, but delivers exponential returns over time. Einstein called them the eighth wonder of the world. Um, do you think it's overstating it to say that the returns on habit modification are exponential, or you think that's a fair statement?
Well, in a mathematical sense, your habits are not like a formula. It's not like you can just plug your life
Yeah.
into an equation and, spit out a result. But conceptually, or, in some kind of like broader philosophical sense, certainly what you just described, compound interest starts out small and then compounds into something much more meaningful over time. We see that sort of pattern all the time with your habits, like
Yeah.
the person who reads for 10 minutes today. Well, reading for 10 minutes today does not make you a genius, but over a 10 or 20 or 30-year period, the person who is always learning something new or going to bed a little bit smarter than they were when they woke up, yeah, that can be a pretty meaningful difference in wisdom and insight. Or, the person in the office who always gets one extra task done. Maybe it's just one more sales call today or one extra email or something. Well, again, making one sales call today does not make you an all-star. But over a 20 or 30-year career, the person who's always doing one extra thing, that can be a pretty meaningful difference in results. And so you see this same pattern again and again throughout life, which is the daily action that seems pretty insignificant, relatively easy to dismiss, pretty small. It compounds, it transforms into something much greater over time. So time will magnify whatever you feed it. If you have good habits, then time becomes your ally. And every day that goes by, you kind of put yourself in a stronger position. And if you have bad habits, time becomes your enemy. And every day that goes by, you dig the hole a little bit deeper. And so what I'm really trying to get across when I talk about habits being the compound interest of self-improvement is an emphasis on trajectory rather than position. There's a lot of discussion about
Yes.
position in
Yes.
life. What's the
Yep.
number on the scale? How much money's in the bank account? What's the current stock price? What are the quarterly earnings? We have all these ways of measuring our current position. And then if we aren't where we wanted to be, or we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve, we feel guilty or start to judge ourselves, or we feel bad because we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve yet. And what I'm encouraging is to say, listen, measurement can be useful, but just for a minute, can we stop worrying so much about our current position and instead focus a little bit more on our current trajectory? Are we getting 1% better or 1% worse? Are your habits leading you on an upward path, or are you flatlining? And if you're on a good trajectory, then all you need is time. So this idea of small habits adding up and compounding into something more is not necessarily like a mathematical argument, but I do think that it is a philosophy or an approach that resonates with real life experience and what we all have seen in how our daily actions add up into something much greater over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get into the mechanics of how we can improve our habits. And James, I'm happy to offer myself as a guinea pig.
Okay.
My wife will tell you that I'm a fixer-upper. And one habit I want to adopt is journaling every morning. And this is something I have literally been trying to do for like 20 years. Right. I get into these modes of like, I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, and every time I do it, I take 20, 30 minutes to journal in the morning. And I'm like, this is fantastic. I should do this every day. And I've had periods of doing it for like, little spurts of enthusiasm 2 or 3 times a week for a couple months. And then it sort of fades away.
Yep.
So how do I make this a daily habit?
Okay, so let me lay out the framework, and then we can talk about some practical considerations. So, in Atomic Habits, I talk about there's basically 4 ways that you can, or 4 things you can do if you want to help shape a habit. And I call them the 4 laws of behavior change. Now, you don't need all 4 of these things to happen at the same time, but the more of them that you have working for you, the better positioned you are to follow through on a good habit. So, from a quick overview, the first law is to make it obvious. So you want the cues of your habits to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see. The easier it is to see or get your attention, the more likely you are to act on it. The second law is to make it attractive. So the more attractive or appealing, the more engaging or fun a habit is, the more likely you are to feel compelled to do it. The third law is to make it easy. So the easier, more convenient, frictionless, simple a habit is, the more likely it is to be performed. And then the fourth and final law is to make it satisfying. The more satisfying or enjoyable a habit is, the more that you have some kind of like positive emotional experience with it, the more likely you are to return to it in the future. So make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. There are many ways to do each of those things, but that's the big picture view. So if you're sitting there, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I have a habit that I keep procrastinating on, like I just wish I could get started on it, Or maybe kind of similar to what you just said, Rufus, oh, I do this every now and then, or I've done it in fits and starts, but I've never quite kind of been consistent with it. You can just go through those 4 laws and ask yourself, how can I make the behavior more obvious? How can I make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? How can I make it more satisfying? And the answers to those questions will reveal different steps that you can take to increase the odds that the behavior is going to occur. So let's take your journaling example. So if we talk about the first law, make it obvious. This can mean a couple different things, but it's about structuring your physical environment to make it obvious when and where the behavior is going to occur. So you could start by buying a journal, presumably you already have one, and then choosing a spot where that's going to occur. So is there a seat at the table or a chair in the corner of the room or a pillow in, a different room or something where you're going to sit and that's going to become the journaling chair. And the more clearly that space is defined, the more obvious it is, the more that this is the one thing that happens here and I don't do anything else there, the more likely it is that you start to tie that behavior to that space. And there have been a couple research studies that have shown that it's easier to build a new habit if it's the only thing that's happening in that space, because you're not like competing with all the other things that happen. For example, let's say that your couch at 8 p.m. is where you normally watch Netflix. And if you say, well, after dinner now, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to try to journal on the couch. Without even really thinking about it, you're kind of subconsciously pulled to grabbing the remote and turning on the TV because that's what usually happens there. Whereas even if you're in the same room, but you set a separate, space for it, a chair in the corner or something, you don't usually sit there to watch TV. And so it can be a little more clean that you sit down and this is where you do the journaling. So make it obvious. Another example of this, when I want to, what I find is that one of the big habits for me is writing. Am I writing the next piece of content, a newsletter, a chapter of a book or whatever? And the beginning of that process is always the hardest part for me. The hardest thing, the biggest point of friction is, did I write the first sentence or not? Yeah. And so what usually happens is I'll sit down at my computer and I'll open up, I'll go read about the latest sports news, or I'll browse social media or do something that takes me off course for an hour. So sometimes I'll write the first sentence that I want to write, or the first thing that I want to, start writing about. I'll put that on a Post-it note and I'll just put it right on top of the keyboard so that the next time I come back, it's just staring me in the face. And all I have to do is just type that first sentence out. And now, the friction has been broken and I'm kind of into the task. So I make it very obvious what I'm going to work on. So I think the question is, do you want to do that with your journal? Do you want to put that in a place where you see it as soon as you wake up or whenever the right time is to do it? So that's the first law, make it obvious.
Yep.
Second law, make it attractive. I think the key question to ask yourself here, and whether it's journaling or any other habit that we're talking about, is what would this look like if it was fun? What would it look like if this was enjoyable to me?
Yeah.
And, with most things in life, there may not be 1,000 ways to do it, but there's almost always more than one way. And you should choose the version of that habit that feels most genuinely exciting and interesting and appealing to you. I think the most common New Year's resolution is do something like exercise or go to the gym. And I kind of feel like a lot of people go to the gym in January because they think they should go to the gym, or that society wants them to go to the gym or something. But we could come up with a very long list of what it means to live an active lifestyle. Rock climb, do yoga, kayak, whatever. And you should come up with that list and then pick the version of an exercise habit that feels most fun to you, that feels most attractive to you. So in the case of journaling, I can very easily see how someone could get in the mindset of, well, for it to matter, for this to count, I need to write a full page every day or something like that. But let's come up with something fun. Maybe the fun version is that you journal one sentence each day. And that's easy and accessible, and you can do it even if you forgot about it all day and you're getting ready to climb in bed at the end of the night. Maybe it's small enough that it sounds kind of like a game, or that it sounds fun to you. Or maybe the fun version is that you don't just journal off the cuff or, whatever you're thinking at the time. You have a journaling prompt that you always answer, or you have a rotating series of questions that gets you started. But whatever it is, you should pick some version of that feels appealing to you. So
I like the idea that's a very individual thing, that the characteristic that makes a given habit attractive is different for each individual. So for instance, like for me, for the past few weeks, I've had a better run with the journaling. I've been up to
Mm.
like 3 or 4 days a week. And it's been partly because I actually love the free writing exercise of just like write anything.
Mm.
And then I try to follow that with some intentions about my day
Yep.
and who do I need to be to accomplish those intentions. But the free writing for me is fun. And if I pair that with a hot cup of coffee, which I love, right? And then
Yeah.
now I've got an attractive bundle to start with. And then I guess making it shorter initially, having lower expectations about sort of the length of the exercise. Maybe that fits into making it both attractive and easy.
And easy, sure. And you will see some of the things we talk about, they start to overlap. Like
Yeah.
a certain change may make something both obvious and easy. And so that's, the first and the third law. But your hot cup of coffee is an interesting one. I just want to double click on that for a second. So this is a strategy that I mentioned in the book, but it originally came from Katie Milkman, who's a researcher at Wharton. And her idea is what she calls temptation bundling, and you combine something that you want to do. So in your case, drink a hot cup of coffee. That's something that sounds nice to you, with something that you need to do. So in this case, the journaling habit. And by combining those two things together, you're instantly making journaling more attractive. It's the thing that happens when I get to have coffee. And there are many examples of this. Katie Milkman's example, if I'm remembering correctly, is that at the time she was really obsessed with reading the Hunger Games books. And so all she wanted to do was just keep going in the series. But she needed to go to the gym and work out. And so the little rule that she created for herself was, I'm only allowed to read the Hunger Games if I'm on the treadmill. And so by combining the thing she wanted to do with the thing she needed to do, suddenly running became a lot more appealing because she has this naturally motivating factor that's associated with it. So there are many examples of how you could do that, but the combination of something like that can help make habits more attractive. Okay, so that's make it obvious, make it attractive. Third law, make it easy. Journaling one sentence a day is an obvious example of that. Like you're trying to scale it down so that it's not intimidating. And I think my little measure for this, or my little strategy, is what I call the 2-minute rule. If you want to make your habits easy, just follow the 2-minute rule, which says take whatever habit you're trying to build and scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And the more that you can scale it down and optimize it like that, the easier it becomes, and you don't have as much friction or baggage associated with showing up and doing the behavior.
And you say you can even narrow it down to 2 minutes, right? That you could literally like go to the gym, do 1 set of squats, and leave.
I had a reader who did this. So I mentioned this guy. His name is Mitch, and I mentioned him in Atomic Habits. He lost over 100 pounds, and he's kept it off for more than a decade now. But when he first started going to the gym, like the first 6 weeks, he had this strange little rule for himself where he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he would get in the car, drive to the gym, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds ridiculous, but what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up. He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And this is something that I think a lot of people sort of fail to realize, which is a habit must be established before it can be improved. It has to become the standard in your life before you scale it up and optimize it and turn it into something more. You need to standardize before you optimize. So I'm always reminded of that quote from Ed Lattimore where he says, the heaviest weight at the gym is the front door. Like, there are a lot of things in life that are like that,
I love that.
There are a lot of the starting is the hard part. And so if you can scale it down and use strategies like the 2-minute rule, you can master the art of showing up and gain a foothold and then advance from there.
Yeah, no, I had the same response hearing the 2-minute rule. Initially, I was like, that's crazy, to drive to the gym and do a 2-minute workout. But I can see that it actually, it actually reverses the sense of onus, the sense of obligation you have to do this big thing, and you start to think, hey, I'm here. Why don't I build on this? And this notion that starting something is the hardest part, as you say, the door is the heaviest weight. Opening the door is the heaviest weight to lift in the gym. That really resonates for me, right? That we just have to.
It's
we have
easier
to make starting. easier. Yeah.
It's easier to optimize something you're already doing than it
Yeah.
is to start something that you haven't done yet. And so if you can just get started, there are tons of options for optimizing and improving. And the key is making it as easy as possible to start. So if
Yeah.
I could only give one of these 4 laws, I think all 4 are helpful and all 4 work really well. But if I could
Yep.
only pick one, I would pick make it easy. Because
Interesting.
the frictionlessness of it, scaling it down and making it easier to show up and get a small win and start to have a feeling of progress, even if it's less than what you ultimately hope to do, that is an upward cycle and it will feed itself. And so making it easy to get started is a fantastic place to focus and think about if you're trying to build a new habit. Okay, so final law now, make it satisfying. This is just about reward and making sure that you have some positive emotional experience with what you're doing. And sometimes it could mean an external reward, like if I don't miss a workout for a week, then I get to take a bubble bath or go for a walk in the woods or something. Or, you could do the same sort of thing with journaling. And external rewards can be helpful for the short term. They can, kind of make the experience more enjoyable. In the long run, I think the real reward, the real satisfaction we're going for is that doing this habit reinforces the type of person I want to be. And so like in my case, when I go and work out, I want to be the kind of person who doesn't miss workouts. And so as long as I'm doing my first set, I can feel good about it. We play this game with ourselves a lot of the time where we kind of promise that we can be happy once we achieve something, or we'll give ourselves permission to be satisfied once we've built the habit or stuck to the thing or achieved a certain result. And I think if you can start to draw this connection between your habits and who you are and see how those things match up, you can feel happy in the moment. You don't have to promise yourself happiness in the future. You can just feel good about the fact that you're showing up and being the kind of person you want to be.
Interesting. Yeah. So the identity is part of the reward. One habit that I have successfully developed in the last 20 years, kind of accidentally, or I guess with some intention, is running. So I didn't used to like to run. I'd force myself to do it a couple days a week. I now run 7 days a week. Right. And if I don't, I feel this kind of hunger. I feel deprived if I don't do the morning run. So how did this happen? I realized that I kind of somewhat accidentally fell into some of the recommendations in the book, which is I started by giving myself permission to listen to audiobooks or podcasts that I love while running. Initially, it was hard for me to pay attention to the to grok what I was listening to while engaged in the physical exertion of running. But I found that if I did it by that became easier and easier once I got over a certain threshold. And then I look forward to the run because I'm looking forward to listening to the podcast or the audiobook. I also gave myself permission to take a paper cup of coffee and walk for the first quarter mile with a cup of coffee and just take in the sunshine and the neighborhood right before running. And just over time. And I also gave myself permission to, if I only had 15 minutes, I was a tight schedule that day, I just go and do a series of sprints. I'd be done in 12 minutes. But I still do it. And then I have this reward of like the shower and and of course the thing with something like exercise, and particularly cardio exercise, I think, is that kind of runner's high you get is itself part of the reward.
Yep. There's such beautiful examples. There are a couple things that stood out to me there. So the walk with the paper cup of coffee before the run, that is such an interesting little entry point. There's this momentum is a huge thing in life. You sit on the couch and you don't move very much, and so you're kind of low energy and you feel like moving even less. Or you take a step, you walk outside with a cup of coffee for a quarter of a mile and you turn a couple blocks, and then all of a sudden you feel like throwing the coffee down and going for a run. And it works both ways. It's like if you can find just a small way to get the momentum moving, you kind of feel like moving a little bit more. So that's a lovely little entry point. The hot shower as a reward, I can totally see that. And what a delightful way to like end the experience. Yeah, this is a really good example. And I think um, I have heard this from many readers, and I always think it's such if I can just had never quite heard it put that way, but I've been doing this for years with my marathon training. Or I always
Yeah,
thought that
yeah.
too, but I just didn't have a language to describe it. That to me, those are some of the best pieces of feedback because I'm like, oh, good. People who are out there like doing it, this is how they do it too.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well,
thanks for sharing those examples.
and also once you know how, what the sequence of steps were that made that work, it's easier to apply it to the next habit you want to develop.
Mm,
And one of another thing I've sort of stumbled into is what you call habit stacking, right? Which is I'll get back from my run, take the shower, and then I'm in the habit of doing 3 hours of really focused morning work. And this is partly informed by reading Dan Pink's book When about the scientific secrets of
mm,
perfect timing, realizing that wow, I have this that my lucidity in the morning, my ability to focus in the morning is this really valuable thing, and I also have a lot of energy after the morning workout, and I'm just gonna safeguard those beautiful 3 hours and make sure that I apply them to the stuff that matters the most. Um, and then I don't eat in the morning. I'm on the time restricted eating plan. Then I have a healthy lunch, and then after that, James, it all falls apart. I've got a great. The
so you
first
got a
four
good
hours of
half
the day,
day. Yeah.
I got a good half day. The first 4 hours of the day, I've managed to stack habits. I need to nail the journaling first thing. I want to make that part of it with intentions, and but all the way through lunchtime, and then it's a bit of a free for all after that for me.
Yeah, so habit stacking is a really powerful strategy. This originally comes from BJ Fogg, who's a professor at Stanford, and he had this interesting insight, which I think is great, which is that it's often easier to stick to a habit if you link it to a habit you're already doing. So he calls it his little tiny habits recipe, but sometimes I refer to it as habit stacking because you're kind of stacking new behaviors on top of each other. But the basic idea is that let's take something you're already doing. So, say, make a cup of coffee every morning. And then let's take a new habit that you want to build. So, for example, let's say you'd like to start meditating. Your habit stack could be after I make my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate for 60 seconds. And it's a very clear space to insert the new behavior into your life. One of the things that's a challenge for a lot of people is they kind of wake up and they sort of have a vague notion of, oh, I hope I feel motivated to work out today, or I hope I feel motivated to write today. And there's no clear and obvious place where the habit's going to live. And so by stacking your behaviors on top of each other, you make it very explicit when you're going to do this. And then once you get good at it, you can start to chain them together. So you can say, after I make my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate for 60 seconds. After I meditate for 60 seconds, I will write my to-do list for the day. After I write my to-do list for the day, I'll prioritize them. And then after I prioritize them, I'll start working on the first one. And so, you're like 6 minutes into your day and you've already knocked 4 or 5 things off your list. And it feels like you're moving forward. You have some momentum carrying you into the next thing. And you can utilize little stacks like that, at the beginning of the day. You could do, a lot of people have one start the day. Maybe when they get to the office, there's kind of like a series of things that they do to kick the workday off. You might have another set at the end of the day to power down, or some kind of routine to wrap up after dinner. So you can use them whenever you find it useful, and it's just a really nice way to get a little bit of momentum going in the right direction.
Do you think mornings are special? I mean, do you think? Excuse me, I'm gonna say that again. Do you think mornings are special? I mean, it seems to me that it's a powerful time for habit stacking because you're waking up, you got a clean slate, and I find it easier to automate a sequence of habits in the first half of the day.
Sure. I mean, certainly not everyone's a morning person, and other people may find it, better to do it at different times. But I do think one thing tends to be true, which is the morning is a time when you're generally less likely to be interrupted and more in control of your time. And you're also, the longer that you're awake throughout any given day, the more that you're creating surface area for new things to come up. And sometimes that's, little fires that you have to put out. It's something somebody said in conversation that made you feel a certain way, and then you're in a bad mood for the rest of the afternoon or something like that. And the longer the day goes on,
yeah.
the more that the opportunity arises for things to come in that could take you off course. And you're like, well, I intended to work out at 4:30, but now I feel like this and I'm not even going to go to the gym. Or I intended to work out after work, but it turns out I have this project to work on. Now I got to stay late at the office. And there are all kinds of things like that that happen throughout each day of life. And so generally the morning tends to be a time that's more under your control. And for that reason, it's good. The other extreme that can also be helpful is, a lot of people like working late at night. And I think what the night owls like about being up late at night is the same thing that the early birds like about being up early in the morning, which is everybody else isn't bugging me and I can have the time to myself and make sure that I'm focused on what I want to focus on. But so in that sense, I do think mornings generally have a quality that a lot of the other hours throughout the day do not, which is they tend to be more in your control.
Yeah. I love this this phrase temptation bundling that you mentioned earlier. I was going to give you credit for it, but you gave the credit to Katie Milkman. Because who doesn't want to bundle temptations? I mean, one temptation is great. Multiple temptations is even better. And I have one example of this in my own life, which is I normally just run like 1.5 to 2 miles in the morning. I get a few sprints in there because it's just really time efficient. But on Saturdays and sometimes Sundays, I'll run 3 or 4 miles, a little longer. And I have a treat, which is when possible, I have a buddy who lives in the West Village, and I run up to his apartment and we have tea, and then I run back. And so it's twice as long as my normal run, but I'm bundling the temptation of listening to a podcast or book that I love, visiting a good friend and having tea, and it just, I really look forward to those Saturday mornings.
What a cool habit. What a great way to spend a morning. I mean, just such a better use of time than what a lot of people, myself included, are often doing on a morning. You get exercise in, you get outside, you get to listen to a book that you like, you get social connection and hang out with a friend that you love, and then you get to come back and do it again and finish with a hot shower like that. I don't know. That just sounds like one of the most ideal ways to start a day.
Are you a temptation bundler, James? Do you bundle temptations in your habits?
Yeah, certainly I have done it many times in the past, and I still have some that are like kind of part of what I do. My best writing sessions are almost always when I listen to this. I have the same playlist that I listen to, and the pleasure of listening to that pulls me into the writing session. And now it's gotten to the point where I only associate those songs with writing. If I hear the first song from that, I'm like, I kind of need to be writing. And so it's become so tightly bound now that it's almost one thing. So that's an interesting little connection, but there are many ways to use the idea.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how to get rid of bad habits, which
Sure.
I understand some of the same principles could be inverted. And once again, I will heroically offer my own bad habits, James, as material here, which is a habit that I got into unwittingly in the last couple decades, was drinking a glass of wine or two each night, and better yet, a glass of bourbon. And of course, there was a wonderful time, I might remind you, like 15 or 20 years ago, in my defense, when we thought that was good for us.
Yeah.
Right? There was a bunch of stuff. It was like 33, there was a New York Times article, 1 to 2 drinks a night for a guy my size would reduce your risk of heart disease by 33%. I had it framed on the wall. I loved it. But of course, more recently, we've learned that this is not helpful, and I've been studying my sleep patterns, and I know it's not helping my sleep. Right. So how can I reduce my drinking habit?
Okay, so we talked about building a good habit, make it obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying. If you want to break a bad habit, then you just invert those 4. So make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. Now, again, there are many ways to do each of these things. So, sorry, let me start over there. There are many ways to do each of these things. So let's say in the case of, drinking less wine, make it invisible could be as drastic as keeping it out of the house and not buying it. So that obviously is less likely to see it. But you
That
also
seems
could
really
just
rash. That seems like an extreme measure, James.
yeah, yeah. But you also could just position it in a way that you're less likely to see it. Right now you might have the wine bottles out on the counter or in some kind of display or stand, and you could tuck them away in a cabinet or put them in the pantry or something. It's somewhere that's more hidden.
Yeah.
And you would think that might not matter that much, but let me give you two personal examples for me. So the first one's drinking related. I've noticed if I buy a 6-pack of beer and I put it in the front of the fridge, like in the door or something where I can see it as soon as I open it up, I'll grab one and drink it with dinner just because it's there. But if I tuck it like on the lowest shelf, put it like all the way in the back, and then I kind of got to bend down to see it, sometimes I will forget that I bought it. It'll be there for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I won't even remember that it's in there. And so often what you find is just a little bit of friction, making it a little bit invisible, is enough to curtail the habit. A similar one that I think we all can resonate at some level with. So let's take our smartphones. Mm-hmm. If I have my phone next to me, I'm like everybody else. I'll check it every 3 minutes just because it's there. But if I have a home office, so I have this little rule for myself where I can't do it every day, but I probably do it 7 out of 10 days or something. I leave my phone in another room until lunch. And I have a home office, so it's only 30 seconds away. Like if I wanted to go get it, I could just walk down the stairs and grab it. But I never go get it. And I always think like, isn't that interesting? On the one hand, I wanted it so bad that I would check it every 3 minutes when it was next to me.
Yeah, yeah.
But on the other hand, I never wanted it badly enough that I would work 30 seconds to go get it. And you find that a lot of habits are like that. If you just introduce a little bit of distance, you make them a little bit invisible, they often reduce themselves. So that's an example.
And didn't you? Sorry to interrupt, James, but I think I heard that you took an additional step of having your assistant remove your social media apps from your phone on Friday afternoons.
Yeah, so I did. I did this.
And you have to reinstall them, right?
I did this while I was working on the book. I came to realize that writing Atomic Habits was kind of wrecking my habits, and I was checking social media too much and not writing enough, and so I was like, I need to come up with a plan for this. So the plan that we came up with was my assistant would every Monday log out of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, reset all the passwords. I would work all week. On Friday, she would send me the passwords, and I could log in over the weekend to use social media. And then on Monday, we do it all over again. Now, I could have reset them myself throughout the week, but she would have known. And that was enough friction that I didn't do it. And so I was able to reclaim some time. I did that for about a year and a half, and it worked. And obviously the book got written. But now I've taken an even more extreme stance. I actually, for the last year and a half, I've not had social media on my phone. I can use it on the desktop if I want, but I just deleted the apps. Yeah. 6 months ago, I did the same thing with email. So I don't have email on my phone anymore. I can answer it on the desktop, but I just don't have it on the phone. It's interesting how it's changed my relationship with it. What I realized was that there really are probably only 2 times a year when I genuinely need to send an email and the only thing I can get to is my phone. And so I was like, well, if I find myself in that situation, I will just download Gmail and then I will send the message and I can delete the app again. Right. And I haven't had to do it in the last 6 months since I've made that change. It's like it can almost always wait until you can get in front of a different screen.
It's a little bit of an approach of parenting ourselves,
yeah,
right?
For sure.
Like we do these things to restrict screen time and, to help our children develop healthy habits. And maybe we need to treat ourselves as children to some degree because we
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the challenges, especially with phones, is that they are both useful and unuseful. It is the blending of they're so powerful and helpful. That's why we all want them, and they make us productive and help us connect with our loved ones. And, it's awesome to be able to do a lot of the things that you can do with it. But it also is very unhelpful. And I think we all have this sense that maybe we use it more than we would like to, even though we benefit from it in other ways. And so I'm trying to find ways to parent myself so that I can use the features that I love and that bring a lot of value to me and I feel good about in the long run, and maybe ignore some of the ones where I feel like, man, I've probably gave up an hour today just doing a bunch of stuff that I didn't even really need to do. And that's kind of where I'm at with social media now. It's like if you had looked at my Instagram use before I deleted all the social apps off my phone, you probably would have said, wow, this must be a really important part of his life. Look how much time he's spending on it. But then I delete the apps and I don't even go and download it again. And it's like, oh, you realize that I didn't actually care about it. I was just tapping on it because I was bored for 20 seconds. And then that 20 seconds turned into 4 minutes or 10 minutes. And you do that, a dozen times throughout the day. And all of a sudden you've lost an hour. So
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, I agree with you. The parenting yourself is kind of an interesting skill that we all need to develop now.
Yeah, so we can invert these four laws for the purpose of getting rid of bad habits. I mean, in my case, what I've done is, I mean, making bourbon unsatisfying is a tall order in my opinion.
Sure.
But the but what I've done is I've said, okay, during the week I'm not allowed. I can't drink bourbon at all. I can only have a little bit of wine, which I don't like as much as the bourbon. So
Mm.
that helps. And then I started to move the wine several days a week to chamomile tea, which
Mm.
is which I probably don't like quite as much as the wine.
Well,
but
so this
but
is
I
a
do
good
like it. But I like
this is
it,
a
right?
good thing too, which is there are three ways that you can break a habit. So you could eliminate it. So you just cut it out cold turkey, be like, I'm never going
Yeah.
to drink wine again. You could reduce it. So that's kind of what I mentioned with like leaving the phone in another room until lunch or putting the beer on the bottom shelf of the fridge. I'm fine with still drinking a beer or checking my phone, but I just don't want to do it as much. And then the third thing you can do is you can substitute. So you can replace it. And replacing the wine with chamomile tea is a good example of that. And what you often find is that you may need a combination of strategies because most of the habits that you're performing, they benefit you in some way. You're getting something out of the experience, even if there's also a downside that you don't like. And so that part that you are getting out of it, the way in which it's serving you, you might need some other outlet for that energy. I was just talking to somebody yesterday who was talking about biting their nails, and they're like, well, I don't want
Yeah,
to do this,
yeah.
but it's kind of the thing that I do when I'm thinking or when I'm writing. It's like when my mind is just kind of like noodling on a problem, I'm biting my nails, so I'm doing that. And so there's some kind of energy associated with that where it's like, I need an outlet for that. If I'm not going to bite my nails, what am I going to do instead? And the two things that I brought up is I've heard this interesting story from a lot of people, which is they'll get Invisalign, the kind of invisible retainers for your teeth. And
Oh wow.
over the course of the next like year and a half while they're wearing them, they often stop biting their nails because suddenly it's really hard to do
Interesting.
that. So
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
created some friction. So this is an inversion of the third law. So rather than making it easy, make it difficult, right? So they're making
Mhm.
it difficult to bite their nails. But you still have somewhere that energy needs to go. You used to do that. So maybe you could pick up like a little, you can imagine like a squeeze ball or something that's on your desk. And so you're just squeezing that while you're kind of thinking on the problem or writing or something, or a fidget spinner or whatever it is. But you can figure out some version that works for you. And I think if you can have a combination of strategies like that, maybe you try to make the
Yeah.
wine a little bit more invisible so it's not, you can't see it as well. Maybe you make it a little more difficult so there's more steps between you and that. And maybe you come up with something that you can replace and it's, put in its place like the chamomile tea. Collectively,
Yeah.
the variety of
Yeah.
changes all work together enough to reduce the habit to your desired level.
Yeah. The for me personally, part of what helps in making things unattractive or attractive is understanding the the mechanism scientifically of how certain things are good for me or bad for me. So, example, like when I learned that, of the health benefits of exercise and understood more deeply how that extends your life and improves your cognition, health benefits of fasting or of the cold. Like I used to think if I'm physically cold outside, that's a bad sign my body's struggling.
Mm.
And I've read about exactly how it is that cold, has positive health impacts. And so now if I'm walking down the block and I'm cold, I think, oh well, this is something good is happening, you know. And on the other hand, and this is part of the fun of hosting a podcast. We had a conversation recently with Chris Van Tulliken about ultra processed foods that went deep into exactly how ultra processed foods, mess with your microbiome, which screws with everything from your mood to your longevity to your immune system. And now, anytime I take a bite into a Dorito, I'm thinking about that mechanism, like exactly how that happens. Um, and so for me anyway, this kind of like scientific exploration of these topics really helps me have more positive or negative associations with these behaviors.
Definitely. The second law, make it attractive or make it unattractive in the case of breaking a bad habit, is all about interpretation. It's about the cues that you see throughout life, whether it's a
Yeah.
Dorito or a cookie on the counter or the phone in your pocket, and the meaning that you assign to those things. And before you educate yourself or learn something new about an experience, maybe you have one meaning that you associate with a Dorito, which might in this case be, and then you get this this new piece of education, this new lens to view things with, and now every time you see one, you think you have a different interpretation. And so what used to be attractive is now less attractive because you've changed the way that you view that cue in the world. And so make it attractive can be done in many ways, or make it unattractive can be done in many ways. And education is one good way that you can alter the way that you view the cues in your life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so when we talk about habit stacking and building a system of habits and how that system can kind of come together, um, you know, you say that we shouldn't focus on goals. Instead, we should focus on our system. This idea that we shouldn't focus on goals is one of the more counterintuitive claims in Atomic Habits for me. Because we've all thought for years, right? Like, write your goals in big letters and put them on the wall, and we should be driven by goals. Why shouldn't
Sure.
we focus on goals?
Well, so first I should say this is coming from someone who's very goal oriented, right? So I've set goals for
Yeah,
all kinds
yeah,
of things in my life. Weights I wanted to lift in the gym, or grades I wanted to get in school, numbers I wanted to hit in my business, like all sorts of stuff.
yeah.
And I had this funny thing happen a couple years ago. I came across this old page in a notebook that I had, and it was from I think it was from 11 years earlier. So I was reading a page that it was 11 years old. And I had written a bunch of goals on it about things that I wanted to do at the time.
Mm.
And looking back on it with that amount of distance was interesting because I had achieved some of them, but most of them I hadn't. And one of my first thoughts was, well, clearly writing the goal down wasn't the thing that made the difference. Like if that would have mattered, I just would have hit them all. And what I came to realize was that the ones that I made progress on were the ones that I had some kind of system for, that I had some sort of
Interesting.
collection of habits
Yeah.
oriented toward. And the ones that I didn't, it was a hope, it was a wish, it was a goal, but it wasn't anything that I had something to back it up. And there's this interesting dynamic, and I'm kind of describing it in myself here, but you see it in many different areas of life, which is the people who succeed and the people who struggle, the winners and the losers in any given area, they often have the same goals. So
Right.
take any
Right.
Olympian,
Yeah.
presumably every Olympian at the Olympic Games has the goal of winning the gold medal. The goal is
Yeah.
not the thing that determines the outcome. Or if you have a job opening and 100 people apply for the job, presumably every candidate has the goal of getting the job. So goals are common and prevalent and pretty easy. Like, I'm an author, right? So I could set a goal to sell 100 million books. The goal took me 3 seconds. Like, the goal is not the hard part. It's building a system of behaviors, a collection of habits that carries you toward that outcome. And so if I was going to put like a little finer point on the language here, what do I mean by goal and system?
Yeah.
Your goal is your desired outcome, the target, the thing you're shooting for. What is your system? It's the collection of daily habits that you follow. And if there is ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a difference between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. It's like almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. So whatever system you've been running, whatever collection of habits you've been following for the last, I don't know, let's say 6 months or a year or 2 years, it's carried you almost inevitably to the outcomes that you have right now. Now, that does not mean that habits are the only thing that matter in life. Like, certainly there are other factors at play, strategy, luck, randomness, so on. But by definition, luck and randomness are not under your control, and your habits are. And the only reasonable, rational approach in life is to focus on the elements of the situation that are within your control. And I think we all have seen this to varying degrees, but a lot of the time, your results in life are a lagging measure of your habits. So
Yes, I
your
love
knowledge,
this line. Yeah.
your knowledge is a lagging measure of your reading and learning habits.
Yep.
Your bank account is a lagging measure of your financial habits. Even little stuff like the amount of clutter in your garage or your living room is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. And we also badly want better results in life. We also badly want better outcomes. But the somewhat ironic thing is that the outcomes are not actually the thing that needs to change. It's like
Yeah.
fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves. Design better habits, build a better system, and you'll be carried naturally to a different destination. So the last thing I'll say here is that goals can be useful. It's not that they don't serve a purpose, right? They're good for clarity.
Yeah.
They're good for setting a sense of direction. They're good for knowing what you're optimizing for. And what you often find is that goals can help drive people forward, especially in the short run. Like maybe you sign up for a 5K and the goal of running that race
Yeah.
is what gets you to train for a couple months. But then the race goes by and you turn around and it's been 3 months since you've run again.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, you kind of get in this yo-yo pattern. And so where I've kind of come down on this is that goals are good for people who care about winning once. Systems are best for people who care about winning repeatedly. And if you really want to make progress in the long run, you're going to need some collection of habits, some system or process to carry you there. And I'm setting this up kind of like a dichotomy, right? We have goals and we have systems, but ultimately, of course, what we really want is both. We want an alignment between your desired outcome, your goal, and your daily habits, your system. And I think for whatever reason, we tend to focus too much on the goal and our hopes and wishes and dreams, and not nearly enough on the system and the collection of habits that can get us there.
And if you have to pick one, if you have to pick either goals or system, you want to pick the system. You have a great line. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your system. And there's another observation you make, James, in the book that really resonated for me, which is that goals restrict happiness. And it seems to me that's partly because of this. A lot of people I know who've been successful have the problem of the receding goalpost. Like your goal is, I'm going to write a book. And you write and in your mind you think, once I've written the book, I'll be a guy who's written a book, and that's just going to completely transform my life. And you publish the book and you feel the same, right? And then you set another goal and another goal, and there's something about kind of goal realization that is less satisfying than we think it will be.
We sort of are infinitely promising to ourselves that we'll be happy when, I'll be happy if I've achieved this thing, or I'll give myself permission to feel satisfied once this is done. And I think that is another reason to fall in love with the system and the process, which is that if you're focused on that, you can feel good about yourself anytime the system is running. You don't have to wait for the long-term result in order to feel satisfied or to give yourself permission to be happy in the moment. And certainly there will be a great moment of joy if and when the goal is achieved, and that's wonderful, but we don't need to restrict it from ourselves. If you're always thinking that happiness is somewhere far off, whether that's if I lived in a different place, or if I had achieved something else, or once I get done with this project, then it will continue to elude you. But if you look for the small ways that happiness can be here and now, that I can feel good about the craft I'm working on right now, or the way I'm spending my time today, or the place that I live, or the people that I'm sharing this moment with, rather than the yearning or the hoping or wishing for something better in the future, then you can find a way to be satisfied and continue to work and grow day in and day out. And I say this as much as a reminder to myself as to anyone else, right? Like all of these things are things that I need to work on too. But trying to pull myself back to center, I do think it's true that we don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems.
Yeah. Gary Kasparov has a line about system mindset versus outcome mindset. And you always want to, I think of this like in the context of poker, like you want to play your hand the very smartest way you can without knowledge of what your opponents hold. So you might lose, but if you played it the best way you could have played it, then that's the win. Opposed to if you're focused on the outcome, that might just be a result of luck.
And you might win, but maybe you're playing a weak player. And so the question is like,
right.
did you get away with something that you shouldn't have done? Or did you actually play it the best way that you could? And if you're focused on the process, then,
Exactly. I mean, you could take the wrong lesson from it. So I find this when I'm playing tennis, like if sometimes if I'm focused on nothing but winning the point against the given opponent, I might say, well, I'm not gonna go to net because my net game has been weak recently, and I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z just to win the point. But I know that if I want to beat this opponent, not today, but a year from now, I
Hmm.
need to go to net, right? And I need to hit the topspin back. I need to do certain things to focus on basically like make the choice that is building a better system, not the choice that's just focused on the immediate outcome.
Yep.
Um, well, uh, let's see. Here, 1 second here. Um, it's so there's so many when each of us looks holistically at our lives and think about what needs improvement. You pointed out that like this can be applied to losing weight, getting more exercise, better financial habits to be growing assets rather than eroding them, learning, your messy house, which is a lagging measure, as you say, of your cleaning habits. you know, um, do you think that that habit change applies to most areas of our lives? Uh, I
I
say that
think
again.
that it
Yeah,
does,
yeah. Go ahead.
but that there's a second thing that is important to consider, which is your strategy. So we can talk about the mechanics of habits all day long, and that's very good and helpful. And it's crucial to understand what it is that you could be doing. And I always kind of say, like, there is no one way to build better habits. There are many ways. And my job is to sort of lay all the tools out on the table. And once you have a full tool belt, you're in a much better position to decide which strategy might make sense for you in a given situation. And certainly knowing those things is very helpful. But there is still a second question, which is which habits should I be focused on? Or where should I be directing my energy and attention? I know how to build habits, but which ones are worth my attention and precious time? And I would say that's more a question of strategy. And so if you can have a good combination of strategy and execution, of habits and choices, then you're in a really powerful position. But so it's not only about habits, but I do think it is all influenced by habits.
Yeah, and can you share with us, James, what are you working on now? And do you have any bad habits? I mean, I think it might be therapeutic for our listeners to hear about your bad habits. I mean, we wouldn't want people thinking that you're perfect.
Yeah. So one of the, but
Yeah,
it, and she's
yeah,
exactly
totally.
right. Like I
Yeah,
wrote it behind her to myself, So there are many, many habits that I've, have struggled to build and so on. One thing that I've been working on recently is habits related to nutrition. And
hmm
I'll just offer a short little story here to illustrate something I think is important. So I tried a bunch of different things. I tried different types of eating. I tried getting some meals delivered or pre-made for me. I worked this one service that would freeze a bunch of meals, then I would just warm those up. And I was thinking, no, maybe I'll be able to stick to a better calorie requirement because of that. I downloaded my Fitness Pal and used that. I didn't even use it for a full day. I used it for one meal. And I was like, man, this is a pain in the ass. There's no way I'm going to do this all the time. So I tried a bunch of strategies. And eventually, about 3 years later, what ended up working was I hired a coach. He sends me one email a week, and I use a spreadsheet to track what I'm eating. And once I had loaded like my 20 or 25 most common meals into the sheet, it became very easy to track. I could just copy and paste whenever I was doing it. And that probably covered like 80% of the things that I was eating. And so, for whatever reason, that combination of things worked for me. And the reason I share this story is because whenever you are building habits, there needs to be some willingness to self experiment, to try things. As I mentioned, there is no one way to do this. There are many tools in the tool belt, and it may take you a little while to figure out what strategy to use. It's not like I didn't know what to do, right? I wrote a book about habits. I knew how it was supposed to work, but I still needed 3 years or so to figure out a version that worked for me. And so if you try something and it doesn't work out, a lot of people unfortunately jump straight to this place of negative self-talk where they're like, oh, see, I knew I wasn't going to be able to stick with this. I always fail at that, or I knew this wasn't going to work out. My encouragement would be to tell yourself that's not what this has to mean. Okay. We don't have to turn it in or blow it up into something much greater. It doesn't need to be an assignment of your self-worth. It doesn't need to be some bigger problem. It doesn't need to be an indication that you'll always fail with habits. It can just be a strategy that you tried that for whatever reason didn't happen to work right now. And we can move on to something else to try and see if that serves us. There's that age-old advice of try, try, try again. I actually think we should adjust it a little bit to be try, try, try differently. But if you keep trying and you keep trying different lines of attack and different approaches, eventually you're probably going to stumble on one that works well for you. And so there has to be some persistence and willingness to evolve and self-experiment that is naturally mixed in with the practical nature of all these habit building strategies.
Now, James, you didn't give us any specific bad habits that you have. So you can think on that. But I would love to hear. You talked earlier about the power of habits and identity, which I think is so interesting. Maybe my favorite quote in the book is, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become." I actually shared that line with my kids. I think it's so great. And you say later the process of building habits is actually the process of becoming yourself. And so there's an interesting question here as to what extent we want to assume the identity of the person that we're attempting to become sooner, because it makes the habits easier to adopt. On the other hand, we need to often see evidence that we are the person, right, who's assumed these new habits in order to believe that it's true. So which comes first, a change in your identity that makes habit change easier, or the habits change that then causes us to believe that we've changed our identity?
Well, it's a two-way street. So behaviors
Yeah.
can influence your beliefs. Your actions change what you think about yourself, but what you believe and the thoughts you carry around also shape the choices and actions that you take each day. So they definitely go both ways. The common advice that you hear is fake it till you make it, or some version of that.
Right.
And that's like, adopt this identity now, and then you'll be that kind of person in the future. And I don't necessarily have anything wrong with fake it till you make it. It's asking you to believe something positive about yourself, but it's asking you to believe something positive without having evidence for it. And we have a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. We call it delusion. Like your brain doesn't
sure.
like this mismatch between what you say
Yeah.
you are and what you're actually doing. And so my encouragement is to let the behavior lead the way, to start with one push-up or 1 minute of meditation or one sales call or one email or whatever it is, and to let that small action provide evidence, be proof that in the moment you were that kind of person. Your habits are how you embody a particular identity. So every day that you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who is clean and organized. Anytime that you study biology for 20 minutes on Tuesday night, you embody the identity of someone who's studious. And so individually, these are small things and they're not going to radically transform your life. But collectively, you start to build up this pile of evidence. You start to cast votes on the pile. As you say, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. And so if you can see each little habit in that light, you start to see the importance of these daily actions that you're taking and how they're shaping the story that you have about yourself. I think at some level, true behavior change is really identity change. It's really getting
Yeah.
you to shift the story that you have about who you are and what's normal for you. And what we're ultimately hoping to get to is the point where you take pride in that aspect of your identity. If you take pride in being a runner, then going out and going for a run is not as big of a deal as it is to somebody who's just getting started. It's kind of like, no, this is like part of who I am and what I normally do. Or if you take pride in the size of your biceps, you never skip arm day at the gym, like you're always going to want to show, you'll fight to maintain that habit. And that is not going to happen overnight. You can't just do it one time and then suddenly feel like, oh, this is, a big part of who I am. But, you may not feel like you're a basketball player the first time that you go out and shoot free throws for 5 minutes. But if you go outside every day and shoot hoops for a little bit, at some point, maybe it's 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, there's some invisible threshold that you cross where you're like, well, I guess I kind of have to admit to myself that playing basketball is part of who I am. And so
Yes.
in that sense, your identity is almost like a painting that's constantly being retouched. You're always sort of making edits to it with your choices each day and the habits that you perform. And if you
Yep.
really want to paint something beautiful over time, I think you need to continue these small habits and keep casting votes for your desired identity.
Yeah.
And eventually you'll turn around and feel really good about the person that you shaped yourself into.
And that's probably that moment when when your identity starts to shift and you start to say, I am a runner. This is part of who I am. That's probably a moment of real momentum building in the behaviors, right? It all gets easier, right?
I think
Because
so. I think it's
yeah,
probably a true inflection point.
yeah,
Like you suddenly are doing it not just for the external results that you're hoping it'll get you. You're also doing it because of how you feel when you do it and the type of person that you are when you do it. And you can draw this deeper connection between this simple little daily habit that doesn't seem like very much and the type of person that you see yourself to be and the confidence and belief that you have in that. And I think this is the real reason that habits matter, the deeper reason. We often talk about habits as mattering because of the external results they'll get you. Hey, habits will help you make more money or get fit or reduce stress or be more productive. And look, that's true. Like habits can help you do all that stuff, and that's great. But I think the real reason that habits matter is that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. They are the
yep.
avenue through which you prove your identity to yourself. And that I think is a much more meaningful thing in the long run.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny though. I mean, even though I've been running 6 or 7 days a week now for years, I still don't think of myself as a runner.
Hmm.
Right. Now,
I
why
don't
is
really
that?
think about myself as an author, which is
Right,
interesting.
right.
I
Yeah,
identify more as an entrepreneur and still do. Now
right,
I kind of have to admit that I'm an author because the book exists,
right,
but
right. It's
it is
hard.
interesting how we can do that to ourselves in some ways.
It strikes me that might have something to do with the power of the identities that we form early in our lives, right? Like I was in my teens and into my 20s, I spent a lot of time hiking and leading canoe trips and doing a lot of outdoorsy stuff. And so if you ask me, I think of myself as like an outdoorsman, even
Hmm.
though I've barely done any of that for the last 15 years,
Hmm.
right? But I wasn't much of a runner when I was younger. And consequently, I think that's why I don't think of myself as a runner. But maybe give me another 10, 15 years and maybe my attitude will change.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about habits and community, because I
Hmm.
think to me this is really, really interesting. I mean, and it's another interesting two-way dynamic, as you were saying about identity. Like on the one hand, we have a tendency to behave like the people around us, right? So you say in the book, choosing what people you spend time with is a powerful part of making the behaviors you want to adopt attractive, right? On the other hand, we often need to demonstrate the right behaviors in order to be accepted into a community, right? Actually, now that I think about it, maybe these two dynamics are kind of one and the same. Like we change our behaviors around other people because we want to be accepted.
The social influence on our habits is dramatic. It's one
Yeah.
area or one topic that I wish I had emphasized even more in the book than I did. I
Interesting.
did write about it, but I just think since publishing the book, I think it has an even larger influence than I realized. So the way I would describe it is that we are all part of multiple tribes. Some of those groups or tribes are like large, like what it means to be American or what it means to be French. Some of them are small, like what it means to be a neighbor on your street or a member of the local CrossFit gym or something like that. But all of these groups that we belong to, they all have a set of shared expectations for how you act, a set of social norms. And when your habits align with the social norms of the group, they're pretty attractive to stick to. They're like really compelling. It's like it helps you fit in and belong. And when your habits go against the grain of the expectations of the group, they're pretty unattractive. It feels like you're adding conflict to the situation. And so, as best you can, you want to join groups where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. Because if it's normal in that group, then it's going to be really motivating for you to stick to it. And we don't even realize how pervasive this force is on our habits. Like,
Yeah.
You know, I could walk outside my house, for example, and look across the street, and maybe my neighbor is mowing their lawn. And I might think like, oh, I need to cut the grass too. And you'll stick to that habit of
Mm-hmm.
mowing your lawn for 5 or 10 or 30 years, like however long you live in the house, and we wish we had that level of consistency with some of our other habits. And it's like, why do you do it? Partially you do it because it feels good to have a clean lawn, but mostly it feels good to have a clean lawn because we're going to be judged by the other people in the neighborhood for being the sloppy one, so it's actually that social expectation that drives the behavior. And there are many, many examples like this throughout life. And so at some root level, this comes back to our deep human need, our desire to bond and connect.
Yep.
Humans
Yep.
are very social creatures, and we all want to be a part of something, even if it's just your little family unit. And so if people are forced to choose between, I have habits that I don't really love, but I fit in, I belong, I'm part of something. Or I have the habits that I want to have, but I'm cast out, I'm ostracized, I'm criticized. Well, a lot of the time, the desire to belong will overpower the desire to improve. And so you really need to try to get those things aligned so that you're not having to choose between, am I fitting in or am I building the habits that I want to have? And if you can get those two forces together, then you have this you actually have like a powerful tailwind rather than a headwind, because the people around you are doing the thing you want to do and you're be kind of pulled along naturally.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. No. No. Choose friends. I'm going to say that again. When we choose friends and future friends, we're choosing the kind of people we want to become.
Yeah, in
And
a lot of ways, when you choose your friends, you're choosing your future habits. But we don't
right.
like necessarily think about it that way. But it's a very common connection to adopt the behaviors of the people around you.
Well, James, what do you see as the downside of habit formation? If we get really good at this, really good at building new habits, are there any dangers that we should be aware of?
I think so. Certainly there are pros and cons to pretty much everything in life. I think one of the downsides is that the more ingrained a habit becomes, the less you start to question whether it's still serving you or not. And life is dynamic, it's not static. And so most habits have a period where maybe they're really useful, but then they may outlive their usefulness. And that was a hard thing for me to learn. It was kind of easy for me to realize, oh, I should not do things that are a waste of time or not do things that are unproductive or something like that. Like that wasn't that hard to convince myself of. But it was much harder to realize, oh, actually, this used to be a really good habit. It still is kind of assigned the label of good habit in my mind, but it has outlived its usefulness. It's not a good habit for me in this current season. And so that may be the case, like maybe a habit just lives in a certain zone in your life or a certain season, and it's time to move on from it. The second thing that is a potential downside is that as you repeat these habits again and again, you start to establish an identity. And previously we were talking about, well, that's a really good thing. We want to try to reinforce our identity. And the more that you believe in that identity, the easier it becomes to perform the habit. And as you're cultivating a new good habit, that is true. That's something that could benefit you. But in the long run, the tighter that you cling to an identity, the harder it becomes to grow beyond it. And so you can think of examples of, the surgeon who has done it 20 years a certain way and has gotten a bunch of good results for their patients. And then a new technology comes along and changes the way that you could do the surgery. And they say, oh, well, I'm not doing it like that. I've always done it this way. And then 5 years from now, they find themselves behind the curve and getting worse outcomes than their peers because the new technology has moved things forward. And so progress to a large degree requires unlearning. It requires you to upgrade and expand your beliefs. It requires you to continually revisit the identity that you have and question whether that identity is continuing to serve you. And we all find ourselves in situations where we still have beliefs that we're holding on to and stories that we're clinging to that aren't really that helpful. And they can be all sorts of things like, I'm not good at remembering directions. I'm bad at math. I'm the type of person that doesn't remember people's names. I have a sweet tooth. You can come up with all sorts of stories that as you tell yourself that, you're reinforcing the identity and it becomes a little harder to do something that doesn't align with that. And so the process of cultivating, shaping, and evolving your identity is an endless one. It's a practice,
Yeah.
not like a finish line. And so if you can come into it with that lens and realize
Yep.
that there is no there to get to, there's just a process to continue to follow and a series of questions to continue to ask and refine, you can see yourself as this kind of endlessly evolving project and let life unfold before you rather than worrying about getting to a particular finish line.
Absolutely, yeah, and again, because we might be in a certain phase of our lives more focused on success, and later more focused on community or connection, or different things, and you have to constantly revisit. Like, have I built, if habits are algorithms, have I built the right ones for the person I want to be, as you say, you
Sure.
know. I'll tell you my biggest concern with habits as I get incrementally better at them, and I can
Mm.
tell that in the next several months, I think I'm going to get even better at them, having just read your book and had this conversation, is that, it's an incredible, powerful way to kind of automate to some degree sections of my life, right? I mean, it can be very powerful in getting certain things done in order to advance things that are very important to me, health, you know, prosperity of the family, the goals that I think are really meaningful and important. But because it's a little bit like running an algorithm, I find that like the first half of my day when I'm in this automated habit, deeply habit kind of mode, I'm not available in the same way, right? I'm not present in the way that I am when I'm not in sort of habit stack mode. And so I worry sometimes that if I let my sort of habit formation control too much of my life,
Mm.
I'm going to lose some of the spontaneity and presence that's part of my kind of humanity on some level. Is that something that comes up for you?
It's a very common thing that people will bring up. Oh, I don't want to pigeonhole myself or feel like a robot. What about being spontaneous and creative and having space for
Yeah.
freedom and flexibility? And my reply is usually twofold. I mean, first, it's certainly, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I don't actually know anybody who's like, I just know myself. Once I get going on this, I'm going to be so consistent that I'll never miss. I'm just going to be like so, robotic with it that it just isn't going to, be a problem. But let's take it seriously for a second and say like, okay, maybe that is a potential challenge. The way that I view it is that habits don't restrict freedom, they create it. It's actually
Mm.
the people who have the worst financial habits that are always wondering where the next dollar is going to come from, or the people who have the worst reading and learning habits that always feel like they're behind the curve, or the people who have the worst fitness habits that feel like they don't have enough energy. And so certainly I don't think your entire day needs to be scheduled. People would probably be surprised to see how much of my calendar is unstructured. My
Yeah.
favorite thing is like a
Yeah.
blank calendar day. Maybe I got one call, like there's almost nothing to work around. But I have a few pillar habits, working out, writing, reading a little bit, that I try to fit into a couple hours of my day. And then I let the other 20 hours kind of cascade naturally. And I know that if I really nail it with those core
Yes.
things, that I have the structure and the accountability in my life that is going to give me the capacity to have the freedom and flexibility that I want. And so it is a balance between the two. But I still ultimately believe that habits don't restrict freedom. They create it. They provide the opportunity to have more flexibility,
Yeah.
resources, ability, capacity, and so on.
And so in effect, we can schedule unscheduled time,
Mm,
right?
right.
Part of the purpose of being really efficient at advancing the things that we very much want to accomplish is that we can allocate more time maybe for the connection and spontaneity and playfulness, right, that we want to have with those kind of unstructured portions of our days.
Sure.
Last question, James. Can you tell us anything about what you're working on next? Is there another
Sure.
book in the works? What are you
So
thinking?
I have three manuscripts in various states of disarray. So certainly
Wow.
there's, a book that's kind of, germinating at some point. I don't have a timeline or anything like that. I'm still kind of feeling out topics. But I have two projects that I've been working on right now that I'm really excited about. So the first one is 321, which is my weekly newsletter. I just find
Yep.
it fun. It's just a blast. We're at about 3 million subscribers. So a lot of people get it each week. And it's just three short ideas from me, two quotes from other people, and one question to think about each week. That comes out every Thursday. And yeah, if you're interested in learning more, you can go to jamesclear.com. Just click on newsletter. And then the second project, which is a new and exciting thing for me, it's probably the main thing, the number one thing that my audience has asked for since Atomic Habits has come out, which is some type of habit tracking app. And so I'm launching a new app.
Interesting.
It's called Atoms, ATOMS, and it's all about habit tracking and learning about habits and sharing bits of insight and daily lessons from me for building good habits and breaking bad ones. So that's available on the App Store. And again, you can just go to jamesclear.com and click on app.
Oh, fantastic! So that's out now. Yeah, I wonder have you ever thought about collecting stories, like inspirational stories about people's habits transformations? I think that's an interesting part of
I would love to. I
your
think that would
story,
be a
yeah.
fun way to showcase, the impact the book has made, and then also inspire other people to try different strategies and just hear about what's working for people. That's on my long list of things to do.
Amazing. James Clear, thank you for your time today. Thank you for writing this book and doing all that you do. Really, such an interesting conversation.
Great. Thanks, Rufus.